My name's Noah Callahan, and I just turned 30. After a rough and draining divorce, I decided to get out of the city and move somewhere quiet. I didn't have many choices. I was out of money, out of patience, and more than a little broken. That's how I ended up in a forgotten town called Red Hollow, buried deep in the backwoods of Mississippi. My only real option was to move into an old house left behind by my late grandfather, William Callahan. He'd passed away 3 years ago, and nobody had touched the place since. My parents offered it to me as a sort of fresh start. The property sat about 12 minutes outside of Red Hollow proper, on a stretch of land thick with pine trees and silence. 10 acres of isolation, crumbling wood, and echoes. The house itself was ancient. Long wooden halls that breathed in the wind, crooked shutters, and floors that whispered with every step. It always felt a few degrees colder than it should have, like the place was holding on to a chill from decades ago. But it was mine, and it was free. That made it the best thing I had going. The first week passed quietly. I spent most of my time unpacking boxes, scrubbing surfaces that hadn't been cleaned in years, and trying not to get overwhelmed by the scent of mildew and pine. In the evenings, I'd sit on the sagging front porch with a cold beer, watching the treetops sway. There were no car horns, no screaming neighbors, no glow of streetlights, just darkness and the wind. It was almost peaceful, almost. Things started to change on the 7th night. It was a little after midnight. I'd crawled into bed, half reading some forgotten paperback I found in one of my grandfather's boxes, when I heard something strange. A soft, disjointed whistling coming from outside. The tune was off. Not quite music, not really a melody, just a few scattered notes strung together in a lazy, unsettling rhythm. It came from the woods behind the house, faint but deliberate, like someone walking just beyond the trees, whistling to themselves. At first I thought it might be a hunter, or maybe some old drunk cutting through the woods, but it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Something about the sound felt wrong. The tune wasn't cheerful. It was hollow, unsettling. I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, I was still adjusting to life out here. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same eerie tune. Only this time it sounded closer. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight I kept on my nightstand, and turned on the porch light. Pale yellow spilled out across the yard, but nothing moved. I stepped outside, barefoot, the boards groaning under me. The whistling continued, fading just as I raised the flashlight to the woods. I scanned every inch I could see. Tree trunks, brush, the old fence line, but found nothing. No footsteps, no movement, just that strange tune, echoing farther and farther into the night. After that, I tried to ignore it. For the next few nights, I stayed in bed and tried to block it out. But it always came back, somewhere between 1:15 and 1:20 a.m., like clockwork. The exact same rhythm, never faster, never louder, always just on the edge of hearing. I started to feel watched. By the 5th time, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove into town the next morning and went straight to the sheriff's department. A tired-looking man with a beer belly and sun-damaged skin introduced himself as Deputy Mark Holloway. He'd been with the department since the 80s and looked like he hadn't seen much action since then. When I explained what was happening, his face went still. "You said whistling?" he asked, leaning back slowly. "Yeah, every night, past 1 in the morning, behind the house." He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered something under his breath. "What is it?" He looked me over, then said carefully, "You're staying in William Callahan's old place, right? Just off Red Pine Road." "Yeah, that was my grandfather." Holloway nodded. He used to call us about the same thing. Said somebody was wandering around the backwoods, whistling, only in the spring, always around 1:15. A chill ran down my spine. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," he said. "We went out there a couple times, never found a thing. Figured it was coyotes or wind through the pines. But Will was a good man, not the kind to make things up. Maybe it's just something about that place that stuck with me. I hadn't known any of this. No one in my family ever mentioned it. But now, it felt like something old had started again. Something tied to the land, or the house, or maybe just to us. Holloway gave me the standard advice. Lock the doors, stay inside after dark, call if anything escalated. But the look in his eyes said he didn't expect that to help. That night, I triple-checked every lock and even shoved a chair under the front and back doorknobs. I nailed the shutters closed, turned on every outdoor light, and kept the flashlight on my nightstand. But the whistling came back anyway. Louder this time. It started behind the old tool shed, maybe 30 feet from my back door. The notes came slow, mournful, drifting in through the window screen like smoke. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the sound was wrapping around the house, circling me. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the back door. The air was colder than it should have been. The beam cut through the dark, shaking slightly in my grip. I moved toward the shed, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to go back inside. The whistling stopped, just stopped. I swung the flashlight in every direction, expecting someone to lunge out of the trees. But the yard was empty. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and didn't sleep a second that night. It wasn't until the following weekend that I realized I wasn't the only one being affected. My cousin Brady and his younger brother Caleb had come to stay for a few days while their parents were away on a church retreat. They were both good kids. Brady was 15, a little moody and quiet, while Caleb was only 10 and full of curiosity and sugar-fueled energy. They loved the idea of staying in the spooky old forest house. I didn't have the heart to warn them about the whistling. The first day was normal enough. We grilled out back, played some board games by lantern light when the power flickered, and watched old cartoons on my laptop until it died. The boys slept in the guest room together, while I tried to catch some rest in mine. At around 1 a.m., I heard soft footsteps outside my door. I cracked it open to see Caleb peeking down the hallway, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cape. "What's up, little man?" I whispered. He looked a little pale. I heard someone humming, he said quietly, outside the window. I froze. "Humming?" He nodded, eyes wide. It was like the song we were watching on TV, the one with the robot bird. He was humming that. Goosebumps prickled my arms. I followed Caleb back to the room and peeked through the blinds, but saw nothing. Brady was still out cold, completely unaware. I sat with Caleb until he fell back asleep, then crept back to my room. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I heard the humming myself. Not from the woods this time, but from right under the window. It wasn't the same strange tune from before. It was copying the theme from the cartoon we'd been watching. Off-key, sluggish, but unmistakable. Whoever or whatever was out there had heard it and mimicked it. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day I tried to play it off for the boys' sake. We went for a walk, fed the neighbors' goats, and spent time tossing a football around the wide, uneven lawn. But something was gnawing at me. I kept glancing toward the tree line. That night, things escalated. We all turned in around 10 p.m. I'd just dozed off when a sound yanked me from sleep. Caleb's voice calling softly from the living room. I rushed out and found the front door wide open. Panic flooded my chest. I ran outside barefoot and saw Caleb standing near the edge of the yard, just a few feet from the woods. He was holding hands with someone. I froze. It looked like an older man, hood pulled up over his head, face shadowed by the darkness. He was tall and thin, and he wasn't speaking, just gently pulling Caleb towards the tree line. "Caleb," I shouted. They both froze. The figure didn't run, but slowly turned his head toward me. I'll never forget that moment. The face wasn't old. It was young, maybe 20, maybe less. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. That wasn't someone's grandpa. "Let go of him," I said firmly, stepping forward. Caleb tugged his hand back, but the man tightened his grip. Caleb didn't scream. He was frozen, unsure, confused. Then from behind me, a loud voice bellowed, "Caleb!" It was my neighbor, Mr. Thorne, standing on his porch with a shotgun in his hand. The man in the hoodie bolted into the woods without a word, disappearing like smoke into the trees. We found Caleb shaking by the barn. He kept saying, he said he was Grandpa. He said he had something to show me. My blood ran cold. The sheriff's department came out again, this time taking it more seriously. They swept the property, followed some footprints, and found the man hiding in a ravine about a quarter-mile into the forest. He was armed. Tucked into the back of his waistband was a rusted axe and a canvas bag full of tools taken from my shed. Worse, the shed's lock had been busted clean off, something I hadn't noticed earlier. Turned out, the man was the ex-boyfriend of a woman my grandfather had once hired as a caretaker years back. He had a history of stalking and apparently held a deep grudge about something no one could ever prove. They took him in, but couldn't charge him with much beyond trespassing and attempted abduction. He claimed he wasn't going to hurt anyone, but the sheriff said the look in his eyes told a different story. I couldn't stop thinking about the humming, how he'd mimicked the cartoon, how he knew just what to say to convince Caleb to step outside, or how he didn't run when I shouted. He just stared, like he was calculating, like the forest was his home, and we were the intruders. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. After the man in the woods was taken into custody, the local sheriff promised to keep a patrol car near the entrance to our long gravel road, just in case. But deep down, I didn't feel safe. Not really, because the whistling never stopped. It came again the very next night, not from the window, but from somewhere deeper, beneath the house. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost like it was humming directly through the floorboards, faint and hollow, as if someone were hiding beneath the house in the crawl space, or deeper. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in bed with the old hunting knife my grandfather kept in his drawer and waited for morning to come. The next day, I called my uncle Frank, my grandfather's brother, and the only other family member who knew the land better than I did. He lived 2 towns over and had all but written off the place since Grandpa passed. But when I told him what happened with Caleb and the intruder, he agreed to come by. When Frank arrived, he barely spoke a word, just walked around the perimeter of the house, slowly, scowling at the woods like they owed him money. "You remember anything strange about this land?" I asked. "Something Grandpa never told us." He paused near the collapsed woodshed and turned to me. "Your grandfather wasn't always an honest man," he said. "There's a lot about this place he didn't talk about, especially after your grandmother died." I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. Instead, he knelt and started tapping along the side of the house with a crowbar, checking the foundation. After a few minutes, he found something odd. A warped patch of ground where the earth had sunk in slightly. "Help me dig this out," he said, handing me a shovel. Beneath the soft layer of moss and dead leaves, we uncovered what looked like a wooden hatch, its hinges nearly rusted shut. It was hidden under decades of growth, wedged just behind the stone foundation. Frank pried it open with a grunt. A dark hole yawned beneath. The smell hit us instantly. Damp, old wood and mildew, but something else too. Something sour, rotting. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it down. The hatch led into a crawl space, but this wasn't like any normal basement. The floor had been dug out in parts, creating uneven tunnels that stretched beneath the house like burrows. Old boards reinforced the dirt walls in places. There were tools down there too. Rusted picks, an oil lantern, even a coiled length of rope. This wasn't just storage, I muttered. Frank nodded grimly. This was a root cellar, turned into something else. We climbed down carefully, boots crunching on damp soil. The air was thick, oppressive, like something didn't want us there. In the far corner, we found an old wooden crate. Inside were scraps of leather-bound journals and stained photographs. Most were ruined by moisture, but a few were still readable. One photo in particular sent a chill down my spine. It was my grandfather, maybe in his 20s, standing with 4 other men near a bonfire. Behind them, carved into a tall pine tree, was a strange symbol, a spiral with jagged teeth, almost like a screaming mouth. Frank looked over my shoulder and went pale. I told him to burn all this, he whispered. I thought he had. What is this symbol? I asked. He shook his head. It's old. Older than this house. Older than Red Hollow. The settlers who first lived out here. They worshipped something in the forest. Something they called the Hollow One. I didn't know what to say. They believed it lived beneath the trees, under the roots. It didn't speak, didn't take form like a man, but it could whistle, could mimic, and if you heard it, you had to follow. I stared at him. You mean like a siren? No, he said. Worse, a parasite of the soul. It finds people who are broken, people who've lost someone, or who've come back to the woods to bury their past. That night I didn't sleep. I listened. And just before dawn, the whistling returned, slow, deliberate, and this time I heard my grandfather's voice with it. Noah, it said from beneath the floor, you found it, just like I knew you would. The morning sun did little to ease the chill that had settled over me. My grandfather's voice, his exact cadence, his gentle drawl, still echoed in my head. Despite knowing full well he'd been buried nearly a year, Frank was already gone when I got up. He'd left a note, scrawled in his usual crooked handwriting. Burn what you found, all of it. The longer you keep it, the closer it gets. But I didn't burn the journal. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and began reading. Journal entry, April 17th, 1983. It came again last night. The whistling. Same time, 3:07 a.m. sharp. This time, it sounded like her. Anna. I wanted to open the door so badly, to run out and hold her. But I remembered what happened to Jacob Landry, how they found his boots pointing backward, how they never found his head. This thing, it's not her. It wears her voice. It knows where I hurt. The entries spanned decades. My grandfather had been hearing the whistling since before I was born. He'd tried to record it. He'd tried to trap it. At one point, he even mentioned burying an offering in the root cellar to keep it at bay. And there were names. So many names. Some I recognized. Old neighbors, men from town, even a few locals who'd gone missing when I was a kid. Others were strangers, victims, witnesses, worshippers. One phrase repeated throughout nearly every entry: "The Hollow One waits beneath." That afternoon I returned to the root cellar with a plan. The tunnel was deeper than I thought, branching into narrow fingers that clawed toward the forest like veins. Some paths had caved in. Others looked like they'd been recently disturbed. I brought a camera, a backpack of gear, and the small tape recorder I found in Grandpa's shed. I followed the largest tunnel for nearly 40 feet until it opened into a wider cavity. And that's where I found the altar. It wasn't grand, just a raised slab of rock, smoothed unnaturally flat. Surrounding it were bones, small ones, too small. And at the base of the stone was the same spiral symbol I'd seen in the photograph, etched deep with something that had dug into the stone for years. I turned to leave. I wanted to run, honestly, but something behind me moved. Not fast, not loud, just there. A whisper in the dark, like breath across my neck. Then a whistle. Soft. Warm. 2 notes. I turned, expecting to see nothing. But there, just behind a sheet of hanging roots, stood a figure. Tall, unmoving, its outline blurring at the edges like heat off pavement. No face, no color, just shadow. Then it whistled again, and this time I felt it inside my head. I don't remember getting back to the house. My boots were covered in mud. My arms were scratched. The camera was missing. But the recorder? It was still in my pocket. I hit play. Then came my grandfather's voice. "Noah, if you're hearing this, then it's already started again. Don't trust your eyes. Don't trust your ears. And whatever you do, don't follow the whistling." I didn't leave the house for 2 days after that. The tape, the figure in the tunnel, my grandfather's voice. I tried to explain it all away. Stress, fatigue, maybe even gas leaking from the old pipes. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't in my head. It was in the walls, in the soil, in the very air that hung around this cursed stretch of land like fog. I tried calling Frank again, but he didn't answer. When I finally drove to his place, I found it empty. A locked door, lights off. A sheriff's notice tacked to the porch about a missing persons report. Frank was gone. That same night, the whistling came back. This time it was louder, closer, from inside the house. I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to the hallway outside my bedroom. They weren't mine. The next day, I returned to the journal. I needed answers, something I could fight this with. Deeper in the back, hidden beneath pages glued together with wax, I found a sealed envelope marked, "Only if it starts again." Inside was a map. It was hand-drawn, showing the woods behind the house, stretching out into the hills. A red X marked the spot, simply Old Pines. I packed a flashlight, a hunting knife, and a flask of whiskey I hadn't touched in months. Whatever this was, I had to finish it. The hike to Old Pines. It took 2 hours of hiking before I found it. A grove of twisted trees, each one leaning slightly toward the center, as if bowing to something unseen. The ground here was wrong, spongy and warm, even though the rest of the woods were cold from last night's frost. In the center of the grove was a stone circle. It looked ancient. Overgrown with moss and ivy, the stones themselves were etched with runes, variations of the spiral mouth symbol I'd seen in the cellar. At the center was a pedestal. On it, half buried in dirt, was a leather-bound book. I brushed it off. The title burned into the cover read, "Testament of the Hollow." Inside were pages of confessions written by different hands across more than 100 years. Names, dates, rituals, accounts of the Whistler, appearing during times of grief, loss, or change. The entity wasn't just haunting this land. It had been worshipped, and worse. The Callahan name appeared dozens of times. Journal fragment, 1896. Elias Callahan offered his only son to the Hollow in return for harvest and protection. The boy walked willingly into the pines after hearing his mother's lullaby in the whistling. They say he smiled as he vanished into the fog. My stomach turned. We weren't just victims of this thing. We were part of it. Suddenly the air shifted. Stillness fell like a shroud. Birds stopped singing. Wind died. Then came the whistle. Not just one, but many, layered, overlapping, like a chorus of ghosts calling from all around the grove. I turned to run and nearly tripped over something sticking out of the earth. A human femur, freshly broken. Then another whistle. This one was my voice. "Noah," it said, perfectly mimicked. "Come back." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of the living room with a shotgun across my lap and every door locked. Around 3:07 a.m., the power went out. The air turned cold, and the wind carried with it the faintest sound of an old lullaby, my grandmother's. It came from beneath the floor again. I should have left then. I should have burned the journal, the map, the book from the stone circle. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because part of me still wanted to know why. Why my grandfather stayed. Why my family had been tied to this cursed land for generations. And why the Hollow One hadn't taken me yet. I waited until dusk to open the book again. The Testament of the Hollow was more than a log. It was a manual, a survival guide, a diary written in fear and fanaticism by those who had faced the thing in the woods and lived. Barely. Most entries were confessions of people who'd bargained with it. A man in 1924 traded a year of his life for his son's recovery from illness. A woman in 1958 gave up her voice to silence the crying of something in her cellar. Every trade came with a whistle. Every gift came with a cost. At the back of the book, scrawled in a hand shaky with terror, was something different, something dangerous. The echo rite, a ritual not of worship, but of confrontation, a way to call the Hollow One, not as a supplicant, but as a challenger. Speak the whistler's name, burn the offering in sacred ground, and spill your blood into the root line. If it answers, you must not break eye contact. You must not scream, and you must not run. I had no idea what its name meant. The Hollow One was always referred to as it, or the Whistler, or the voice beneath. But the book made it clear. This name wasn't spoken. It was given. I returned to the tunnel under the house, the root cellar, the altar, and I waited. 3:07 a.m. The whistling came on time. But this time, I didn't flinch. I sat before the stone slab, placed the book atop it, and poured salt around the altar in a wide circle, just like the instructions said. I brought with me something else, too. My grandfather's knife, the one I found wrapped in cloth in his drawer after he died. Carved into the blade's handle was a word I'd never noticed before. Ayara. It meant nothing to me. But it wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. And when I whispered it aloud, the earth trembled. The tunnel darkened. Shadows stretched. Roots twisted like fingers across the walls. And from behind me came the whistle, low, rising, curious. I turned slowly. There it stood again. The figure in the roots, this time closer, clearer. Not a man, not an animal, not a ghost. Its form seemed stitched from shadow, bark, and bone. Its face, a blank oval of pulsing bark with a spiral carved where a mouth should be. And from that spiral came the sound. I held up the knife and said the name again. Ayara. The whistler stopped. Its head tilted, and it spoke. Not aloud, but inside my skull, like memory echoing backward. You call me not to serve, but to end. I swallowed hard. Your blood remembers. Your line broke the oath. You will take his place. Then the altar burst into flame. I screamed and backed away, breaking the salt line. And I had made a mistake, because the book was clear. You must not break the line. You must not scream. You must not run. But I had done all three. The whistler didn't attack. It didn't need to. Instead, it vanished like smoke sinking into the earth. The fire died instantly, leaving the tunnel cold and pitch black. When I scrambled out and back into the house, the walls were bleeding, not with blood, but with names, hundreds of them, seeping through the wallpaper like ink. Some I knew, some were my family, some were mine. The price. The next morning, I woke up in the living room with the knife in my lap, and the entire kitchen wall had collapsed inward. Police arrived after a neighbor saw the smoke. They said it looked like a sinkhole had opened under the house, but no one found the tunnel, or the altar, or the book. Just one thing remained, untouched in the rubble, the recorder, and on it, one last message in my grandfather's voice. If you hear this, Noah, then you tried. I'm sorry I left it to you, but blood answers blood. And now, it's watching you. I left Red Hollow the next morning. Didn't pack much. Just my clothes, the journal, and the recorder. I didn't even lock the front door. Let someone else deal with the sinkhole, the blood-stained wallpaper, the name that had etched itself onto every mirror in the house. Noah Callahan. Claimed. I drove for hours, heading west with no destination, no plan, just the constant need to get away. Away from the town, from the tunnel, from the whistle that still rang in my ears when the wind shifted just right. But by the time I reached the motel outside Deerfield, I knew it had followed me. The mirror test. There's an old rule my grandfather used to say, long before I knew it was anything more than superstition. When the forest watches you, check the mirrors. They see what your eyes forget. So I did. I closed the bathroom door, killed the light, let the room grow still. Then I counted to 7 and snapped the light back on. At first, nothing. But then my reflection blinked. A second too late. I stepped back. My pulse thundered. Then it smiled. The dream of the pines. That night, I dreamed of the forest. Not the way it had been, but something older, primeval. The trees groaned like bones, the ground breathed, and the sky was choked with crows that had no eyes. In the center stood the whistler, but it had changed. It wore my face, and when it opened its mouth, it didn't whistle. It screamed. I woke gasping, and the motel room smelled like cedar. There were pine needles in my bed. The stranger, I wasn't alone. The next day, a woman knocked on my door just before dawn. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, black windbreaker. She didn't give a name, just held out an envelope and said, "You've seen it. I can help." Inside the envelope was a photo, grainy, faded, of the altar under my grandfather's house. The spiral, the knife, and standing beside it, me. "We've been watching you since the first report in Red Hollow," she said. "The entity is a Class V mimetic predator. It's not tied to a place. It's tied to blood." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "What, are you some kind of secret agency?" She nodded. "Not a joke. We monitor anomalous phenomena, cults, beings that don't obey natural laws, and whatever you called into that cellar, it's awake now, and it's learning." I asked what it wanted. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me another photo. It was of Frank, hung upside down in a tree, hollowed out, his eyes missing. The tape that shouldn't exist. Before she left, she gave me one last thing, a copy of the recorder I'd left behind in the collapsed cellar. It showed up in our archives. No one knows how. When I played it, I heard my own voice. But it wasn't me speaking. I am the mouth in the root, the tongue in the bark, the eye in the pines. Noah Callahan gave himself freely. Now the line is unbroken. I drove again, further this time, south, through rain, through sleep-deprived highways, through radio stations that flickered between static and whistling when I passed beneath overpasses. But I knew I couldn't outrun it, because the Hollow One doesn't live in the woods. It lives in you once you call its name, and I had done that. The woman who found me in Deerfield, she left a number, no name, just 7 digits scribbled on the back of a receipt. I waited 3 days before calling it. What answered wasn't a voice. It was a tone, a sharp, rising hum like pressure behind the eyes. Then a whisper layered on itself, like 20 voices speaking in unison. Welcome, claimed. A moment later I got a text, just an address, no explanation. Edgefield, South Carolina. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed to stay away. But the nightmares were getting worse. Every night I dreamed of spirals, carved into trees, into skin, into the sky. One night, I woke up with my grandfather's knife in my hand. I hadn't gone to sleep holding it. Edgefield, the address led to a shuttered church outside town, the kind with boarded windows and peeling white paint. A hand-painted sign on the front door read, "No trespass, no whistling, no names." I knocked once. It opened silently. Inside, candles flickered in jars. Salt lines ran along the floorboards, and seated in the pews were maybe a dozen people, at different ages, races, genders. But all of them had the look, sleepless eyes, taut skin, fear buried deep under exhaustion. At the front stood a man in a long coat and faded collar. He didn't smile when he saw me, just nodded. Another called, another claimed. His name was Pastor Jeb Holloway, though no one called him that anymore. Just Jeb. He used to run this church. Now he ran something else, something called the Circle of Stillness. "We're what's left," he said. "The ones who called it, the ones it didn't take. Not yet, anyway. The stillness. They told me the Whistler doesn't kill at first. It binds. It marks you. Watches you. Learns what makes you afraid. What makes you weak. It waits for you to open the door again. And if you do, it steps through." Some of them had been claimed for years. One man, Raphael, hadn't slept in full darkness since 2012. Every time he did, he woke up standing in the woods. No matter where he was. Another woman, Janessa, had lost her voice 3 years ago. Not to sickness, but because she gave it to the Hollow One in a moment of desperation to save her child. "He's still alive," she whispered through a writing board. "But now he whistles in his sleep." And Jeb? He'd once tried to cast the Whistler out using holy rites. It had laughed. Now he walked with a limp and avoided mirrors. The spiral within. They showed me something else that night. Beneath the church, through a trap door under the altar, a spiral carved into stone. Older than the building, older than the town. "This is the route mark," Jeb said. "One of 7 across the country, places where it's strongest." He traced it with chalk, then pointed to the center. "We believe it's trying to anchor itself, not just to people, but to places, to memory. We think your family line was one of its first anchors." I asked what that meant for me. Jeb looked at me, dead serious. "You're not just claimed, Noah. You're chosen." The boy who sang in spirals. That night after the meeting, one of the younger members, A boy named Caleb approached me, said he'd seen me before. In the forest, years ago. I told him that couldn't be. I hadn't come back to Red Hollow until a month ago. He just shook his head. Doesn't matter. The pines are a doorway. You go far enough into the song, you stop walking on straight paths. He showed me his arms. Carved into them, thin and neat, were spirals. Hundreds of them. I can't stop drawing it, even in sleep. But you brought something back, didn't you? I didn't answer. He already knew. The final note. When I returned to my motel that night, the door was ajar. Everything untouched, except the recorder. It was playing, on loop, but not the whistling, not words, a heartbeat. And beneath it, faint but rising, a whisper I recognized. Noah, it's time to come home. The next morning, I woke up with blood on my palms. Not a lot, just enough to be disturbing. Dried, flaked around the cuticles. I checked myself over, but there were no wounds. None that were mine. And in the mirror, written backward in condensation on the glass, "Come dig." The word dig made my stomach twist. I hadn't heard it since that night in my grandfather's basement, since I unearthed the altar, the bones, the recorder. But now it was calling me again. Back to Red Hollow. Return to the pines. The town hadn't changed. Still that odd silence. Still the thick, cloying air that smelled faintly of iron and pine sap. But people looked different. Paler, thinner, shadows under every eye. Like they hadn't slept right in weeks. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I was the one who had changed. I stopped at the house first. What was left of it. The cellar had collapsed, caved in from the sinkhole I'd seen before I left. But someone or something had cleared a narrow path through the rubble. A new tunnel lined with roots, and carved above it, in ash-black script, the root beneath the root. I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I went to the woods. The Spiral Grove. There's a part of the forest nobody talks about. Even the town's hunters stay away. No trails, no signs. Just a quiet stretch of ancient pines where the birds don't sing. They call it Gallows Hollow, though no one remembers why. I followed a trail I shouldn't have known, but I did. Every turn felt familiar, like I was tracing an echo of myself. Deeper and deeper until the trees grew twisted, bark gnarled like knuckles. That's when I found them. The root marks, 7 spirals, burned into the earth, arranged like points on a compass. And in the center, a stump, old, hollowed, weeping black sap that smelled like rust. As I stepped toward it, my vision pulsed. Then came the voice. 1 mark wakes the path. 7 marks raise the gate. Your blood is the key. I staggered back, but something held me in place. Roots, moving, slid from beneath the stump and wrapped around my ankles. Not violently, more like a leash pulling taut. I wasn't alone. The ones who never left out from behind the trees, figures emerged. Not ghosts, not people. Something in between. Eyes too wide, mouths slack. Skin gray like bark left to rot. They didn't speak, but I knew them. The lost, the claimed, who had vanished. I saw Frank among them, saw Caleb, eyes glazed, spirals etched into his cheeks like brands. One of them pointed to the stump, then to me, and all together, in one horrible harmony, they whistled. Below the pines, I ran. I don't remember how far, just that I didn't stop until I reached the old ranger station by the ridge. Abandoned since the fire 10 years ago, but not empty. Inside was a map, a topographic survey of Red Hollow and the surrounding forest. But someone, some mad cartographer, had overlaid spirals all across the region. Not just 7, dozens. And at the center, scrawled in frantic handwriting, "The heart is below." The Hollow One is not a spirit, it is a seed. The seed. It isn't just a haunting, it isn't just a curse. It's a cycle, something ancient, something buried, and now it's growing. Those tunnels, the spirals, the dreams, they're all symptoms of something pushing up from underneath. Something that's been sleeping for centuries, maybe longer. And me, I'm not just being haunted, I'm being used. A conduit, a vessel, a gardener called to dig. The decision. I returned to the tunnel that night, the one under my grandfather's collapsed house. I didn't tell Jeb or the circle. I didn't bring a flashlight, just matches and a rope tied to a pine above. I descended slowly, and I whispered to whatever waited, "You want me? Fine. But I want answers." And something whistled back. The rope held. That was the first surprise. The second was that the tunnel breathed. Warm, shallow gusts pulsed from deep below, carrying the smell of damp earth, rotting leaves, and something sharper, like decay in a locked room. The walls weren't just dirt. They were root-wrapped, fibrous, veined. I struck another match and kept going. Down, 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 until I hit stone. The hollow threshold. The floor leveled into a chamber. Rough-hewn rock walls, circular. Natural, but altered. There were markings here. Spiral glyphs and carved lines, some of them still weeping black sap like the stump in the forest. At the center of the chamber stood a monolith. Tall, obsidian, perfectly smooth, except for a thin crack running from top to bottom, like a door waiting to be opened. And circling it were the bones, hundreds of them, human, arranged with reverence in patterns that mirrored the spirals. Some were recent, and etched into the stone at the base. We called it to escape the burning sky. It came hungry. We fed it our names. The memory core. When I touched the monolith, everything changed. I wasn't there anymore. I was in the pines, but older, wilder, fireless, frozen, moonlit. And in front of me stood 7 figures, dressed in bark and bone, chanting in a language older than the continent. They were the first, the callers. I could see it, feel it, how they bled themselves onto the trees, sang into the wind, and brought it from wherever the Hollow One had waited. Another realm? Another reality? I don't know. But they brought it here. To silence the fire, to stop the machines, to keep time frozen in the roots. That's what they believed. Instead, it took their words, their songs, their children, and it never left. The bargain, the vision shattered. I was back in the chamber. The monolith cracked open, and from within stepped the Whistler. Not a man, not a beast, a shape like a tree, but wrong, bent limbs, no face, a hollow in its chest where wind howled and the sound of whistling pulsed like breath. But it didn't attack. It bowed, and in my mind, I heard it. Not words, but intent. You called me, Noah. You fed me. You grew me. Now bloom. The roots take hold. The ground split. Roots surged from beneath, wrapping around my legs, my arms, my chest. Not squeezing, binding. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be claimed. Not possession, not death. Transformation. I was soil. I was vessel. I was the new seed bearer. And in the distance, I could hear the pines singing, not whistling now, but chanting, wordless and deep, a preparation, because something is coming, something bigger. The Hollow One was never the end. It was the herald, the final truth. Before I blacked out, before the chamber sealed behind me, I saw one last thing etched into the stone above the monolith. It will whistle through the world, and only the rooted will survive. Day 1. The Awakening. I don't remember leaving the chamber. One moment I was bound by roots, my body sinking beneath the floor of the world, and the next I was lying in the middle of the woods, staring up at a sky that felt wrong. Too gray. Too quiet. The wind sounded like whispers now. Branches creaked like creaking bones, and beneath it all, the constant hum of a song I couldn't fully hear but could feel. It pulsed through my veins like a second heartbeat. I wasn't sure how long I'd been gone, but the trees had changed. Pitch black bark, twisting in on itself, almost spiraling into the sky. Their roots bulged above ground, spreading across the forest floor like veins from some massive, underground heart. Something in me told me to leave, but it was drowned out by something else, something deeper. Bloom. I didn't realize I was walking until I found myself at the edge of town, and I wasn't alone. Day 2. The Circle of Stillness. They found me before I crossed into Red Hollow. Jeb, Caleb, Janessa, and a few others from the circle. I saw it in their eyes even before Jeb spoke. Fear, not of what was coming, of me. You went back, he said, gripping the cross hanging from his chain so hard his knuckles turned white. You opened it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They saw what I felt, rooted, connected to something larger than myself. Janessa made the sign of the cross, but she didn't look at me. She stared past me, into the woods. You weren't supposed to go alone. I wasn't alone, I said, and I wasn't lying. I could feel them, every tree, every root, every marked person that had been claimed, all of them breathing together beneath the soil, waiting. What did it show you? Caleb asked quietly. I hesitated, because the truth wasn't something you could just say. The Hollow One wasn't just a spirit or an entity. It was change. It was the next step, and I was its vessel. Everything, I finally whispered. Everything we were, everything we will be. Jeb shook his head. Noah, do you have any idea what's about to happen? I did, and it was already too late. Day 3. The whistling began. It started just after midnight. The first whistle rolled through the pines, slow and steady. Then came another and another, until the entire forest sang. By morning, half of Red Hollow had gone silent. People missing, houses empty, windows left open with spirals etched into the glass. The circle panicked, scrambling to break salt lines and light protective candles. But the wind carried needles of ash and whispers of roots pushing through foundation beams. No locks could keep it out. No prayers could keep it back. They weren't just haunted anymore. They were being consumed. Day 4. The seed blooms. I could feel my body changing. Not in an obvious way, but inside. A tension beneath my skin like branches pushing to break through. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I didn't need to anymore. Instead, I walked through houses that no longer held people, through streets overcome with vines that hadn't been there the day before, toward the heart of the woods where the monolith had once stood. Jeb followed me there. You can fight it, Noah, he said behind me, his voice cracking. You have to. I looked back at him. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to whatever was looking through me. You called it here, Jeb whispered. Centuries of blood, of bargains. Why? To bloom, I said. Jeb wept. Caleb just stared at me with hollow eyes, nodding in quiet acceptance. He understood. He'd always understood. The final truth. The pines were never just trees. They were doors, anchors, a living cradle, hiding something far older than Red Hollow, far older than humanity. The Hollow One wasn't a monster underneath us. It was the Earth, a parasite, a god, a seed from something that fell long before the first settlers ever carved spirals into stone, and it needed vessels to return, people broken enough to listen, families bound tightly to the land, voices that could be twisted into whistles. Noah Callahan, the voice inside me sang, "You are the rooted. The pines will spread." Day 5. The pines spread. By the time the sun rose, there was no town, just trees and spirals and whistling. Day 6. Red Hollow erased. No broadcasts, no cell service, no satellite pings, just absence. From above, Red Hollow looked like a crater of green, dense pine stretching for miles, thick with mist. No rooftops, no roads, no trace that a town had ever been there. The locals in surrounding counties whispered about a gas leak, a chemical burn, a quarantine, but those were just words. The truth moved quieter. It whistled. Day 7. The Watcher. He had no name anymore. He had given it up long ago, but he had watched the pines since the first spiral was carved, since the first seed dropped into the soil and began to sing. He lived beyond roads. No home, no contact, only journals, hundreds of them, recording whispers that only he could hear. "It's begun again," he wrote with trembling hands. "The rooted walks, and the forest remembers." He packed a satchel, slung his rifle, and began the long walk east, toward the sound. Day 8. The division moves in. They weren't FBI. They weren't CDC. They weren't anything official. Just 4 black SUVs, 1 unmarked helicopter, and agents with white badges that only bore a symbol, a spiral inside a pine cone. They set up outside the new growth line and began their scan. The trees rejected drones. Satellites glitched. Compass needles spun. But they recorded sound. At 3:17 a.m., 1 long whistle, then 2 short, over and over. One of the agents asked, "Is it communication?" The others didn't answer. They knew it was worse than that. It was a countdown. Day 9. The echo of names. Noah walked the forest floor, alone, or so it seemed, because every step he took, the forest followed. Branches bowed gently toward him, roots peeled away from rocks to avoid his boots. Animals didn't flee, they watched. He felt their names now, the ones the forest had taken, the ones the Hollow One had whispered to before him. Callahan, Halloway, Griggs, Silas Pine, Junior Meyer, Peter with the missing tongue. So many voices, and only one body, his. Day 10, first contact. They sent a drone in again. It lasted 19 seconds, returned covered in sap, embedded in the camera, a spiral, not drawn, grown. When they sent in a scout team, only one came back, eyes gone, mouth sewn with roots. She whispered 3 words before her heart stopped. "It's inside time." Day 11, a voice. Across the pines, Janessa had survived, somehow. She'd holed up in the church basement during the night of the bloom, praying so hard she'd blacked out. Now she wandered the outer woods, clutching a broken crucifix and whispering scripture that turned sour in her mouth. The forest didn't reject her. It studied her. Janessa began to write her own gospel, one carved into bark, into stone, into flesh. The rooted is risen, the hollow walks, the pines remember, and those without roots shall burn in the wind. Day 12. The pines move trees, don't walk. Not in the way we understand, but they can spread. In 48 hours, the pines extended another 3 miles beyond the Red Hollow border. Concrete cracked, pavement crumbled. Homes already empty were claimed, spiraled, twisted, sealed in bark. Inside one, they found a family, perfectly preserved, eyes open, smiling, whistling. Day 13, the global whisper. In Tokyo, a radio operator heard it. In Brazil, a jungle village saw their canopy shift. In Iceland, a shepherd vanished beneath a black pine that hadn't been there the day before. It was no longer local. The pines had cracked something larger, a veil, a membrane, and now it was bleeding. Day 14, Noah's choice. He stood before the old trailhead where Red Hollow's welcome sign once stood. The sign was gone. In its place was a spire of bone and bark, crowned with the skull of a deer and symbols no tongue could pronounce. Noah raised his hand and touched the bark. It opened, and the voice inside him grew louder. One more step, and we are whole. One more step, and we bloom through the stars. He hesitated, because he wasn't sure anymore. Was he leading the pines, or were the pines leading him? The sky spiraled. It pulsed above Noah, immense and alive. A spiral of light and thought, folding in upon itself, turning stars into songs, air into memory. And through it walked the Hollow One, dissolving into brilliance with each step, its form unraveling into vines, spores, whispers. It reached for Noah again. Come, become, begin. But Noah's fingers shook. He wasn't ready to let go of everything he'd ever been. The voice of the world. All across the earth, the whistling changed. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a language, and people began to answer. In Prague, a child carved spirals into his arms and wept in joy. In Morocco, an old man walked into the desert and vanished beneath a black tree that hadn't been there the night before. In Utah, an entire church congregation fell into trance mid-sermon and began humming the same four-note whistle. Something ancient had cracked. The pines were no longer local. Inside the grove, Noah stood beneath the heart tree. It spoke in pulses now, memories that weren't his, lifetimes of thought. The bloom is not a thing, it is a conclusion, the answer that all forests seek, unity, pattern, song. He saw Earth as if from far away, covered in rootwork, spirals blooming through oceans, minds linked not by wires, but whispers. But he also saw himself, flickering, fading, still tethered to something small and sharp and deeply human. Fear. The resistance. Not everyone joined. Some fought, some burned. In a bunker beneath the Rockies, the last division remnants devised a final plan, the Silence Code, a sonic wave meant to rupture the frequency of the pines. They called it their last prayer. They called it the axe. But the forest heard them and began to move faster. Noah's decision. He stood between two paths, ascend with the Hollow One, becoming the first true bloom, or remain behind, scatter his thoughts into the spiral, and warn the world, if it could still be warned. Why me? He asked aloud, and for the first time, the grove answered in his own voice, because you listened. The ascension, Noah stepped forward, not toward the Hollow One, but into the roots of the heart tree. It swallowed him whole, and he began to divide, not die, but fracture, the edge piece of his self planted into another place, another mind, another future. In Tokyo, a girl painted a spiral on her ceiling. In Brazil, a diver found a tree growing on the ocean floor. In Ohio, a boy looked into a mirror and saw Noah staring back. We are not alone. We are becoming. Back in Red Hollow, the town never returned, only pines. And in their center, a statue grew. Black bark, shaped like a man, arms wide, eyes closed, face smiling. At its base, here stood the first bloom. He chose to listen, and through him we remember.